What a great pleasure to have ESPN college basketball studio analyst Seth Greenberg join us today on Questions for Cancer Research. Seth was an NCAA head coach for 22 years with stops at Long Beach State, South Florida. He spent his last 9 years at Virginia Tech, where he was a two-time ACC Coach of the Year. Seth has been working at ESPN since 2012. Welcome, Seth. Great to see you.
Great to be here. How you doing, man?
Everything's good down here. Everything good up there. It's exciting times to be at the start of college hoops. I know a busy time for you, but very exciting for sure.
Yeah, this is a great time of the year. Obviously, it intersects football, the college football playoffs, the start the beginning of the end of the NFL. But this is a good time of year because we just got through Champions Classic, and now we're getting ready for Feast Week and some great matchups.
Yeah, definitely some great games coming up. Lots going on in the world of college basketball these days. Let's start with the transfer portal. We know how difficult the portal can be for coaches, given that they will likely lose multiple quality players to the transfer portal over the course of a season or two. I'm wondering to what extent this has become a two-way process. I would think the coaches are increasingly asking underperforming players to enter the portal, whereas in the past there was probably more opportunity for longer-term development. What do you think, Seth? Are more and more players being shown the door by coaches these days?
No, absolutely not. I think that's not the way it's working, to be honest with you. Coaches want to develop relationships, they want to develop players. Uh, most guys don't even use all their scholarships. So, like, the whole idea that coaches are running players off because of the portal is not true. Now, it becomes a salary cap issue. You're maybe not going to be able to offer a player the money that they think they're worth, and all of a sudden guys are going to leave. They have a value in terms of in their mind what their value is. Retention of players is really important, actually. The most important thing in the transfer portal is retaining the right players. Now, look, if a guy's not working out and he doesn't have a value in terms of your program, you're not going to pay him. That's just the way it is. Because, when we talk about NIL, it's not NIL, it's pay for play. So let's stop using the term NIL. It's absolutely ridiculous. NIL is not a collective where collectives are paying. NIL is actually, being someone that can move the needle in the business sector that's going to be hired by a corporation to move the needle. You saw that some with Dr. Pepper's tried to use that some with, football and quarterbacks. But coaches don't run players off. Very, very rarely do coaches run players off. That is the greatest misconception in college athletics. Players run themselves off by behavior, by academics, not by being good teammates. But in terms of productivity, guys aren't using all 13 scholarships. That's just the way it is. There are some guys that are only using 9 and 10. So players put their names in the portal because they feel they have a certain value, or they want a different role. And I have no problem with that. The problem is what people don't talk about is number of kids that put their name in the portal that end up going nowhere because they don't find a destination. So the advice they're getting, because they're looking and seeking to find someone who's going to tell them what they want to hear. All right, not what they need to hear. And that's a problem. Over 1,000 kids last year to play college basketball ended up with nowhere to go. Left the scholarship and left with nowhere to go. So I think that's a big misconception.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in college, and I discussed this a little bit with Jay Billis, forgetting that I was speaking with an attorney, I basically said, if you avoided any disciplinary issues, you kept your academics up, you were pretty much, looking at a 4-year scholarship. And, Jay said, well, in actuality, they're only 1-year contracts, but.
Well, now they are. Back when you played, they were 4-year contracts.
Were they actually 4-year contracts? Yeah, back then. So, I mean, that's pretty good to hear. I don't know if that will change going forward or if it just becomes tougher and tougher on the coaches, but player retention, I know I spoke to my good friend, Coach O'Toole at Pitt, and they did very well with player retention, and they were thrilled with that. So, look, there should be a good relationship between coaches and players, and hopefully I think there has been for the most part, and hopefully that continues going forward.
Yeah, the big thing is it's not just coaches and players anymore. It's coaches, players, agents, workout guys, grassroots coach, high school coach, prep school coach. The circle of influence around a player is so much greater than it ever was. I have tremendous respect for Jay. My daughter works for his law firm, but we all know that my guy Billis, he states his opinion like it's a fact. Guys don't run guys off. I'm just telling you. They run themselves off.
Yeah, yeah, I get you. I get you. All right. Uh, Seth, prior to the transfer portal, it seemed like it was really tough in the ACC to compete against Duke and Carolina on a recruiting basis, and for a while when you were there on any basis. 14 of the 15 ACC championships over the period 97 through 2011 were won by Duke or Carolina. What was it like for you at Virginia Tech trying to compete against the powerful recruiting of Duke and Carolina year in and year out?
You don't beat them. You don't recruit their guys. I mean, you don't recruit guys at Duke and Carolina. I mean, it's Duke, Carolina, Kentucky. There's a group of schools you're not going to beat for a player. That's just the way it is. I mean, their tradition, their history, which is their tradition, uh, their track record of putting guys in the pros. They recruited the best players in the country. What you had to do is you had to find guys that had a chip. We were fortunate. We beat Duke and Carolina. We beat Kansas when they were number one. We beat Wake Forest when they were number one. You got to find the guys and what I call evaluate up. And evaluate up means not see where a guy is right now, but see where he's going. What's his DNA? How tough is he? Will he buy into the good of the group? Will he defend? We weren't going to run up and down the court with Duke and Carolina and win games. We had to make it a slugfest. We had one good one against Carolina where we went up and down, but mostly uh, we had to do certain things. We had to control the tempo of the game. We had to take away the other team's best players. We had to make sure we didn't turn the basketball over and commit live ball turnovers so we could set our defense so we had to rebound the basketball. And at the end of the game, we had to have someone step up and make a play. And we were able to do that over a 5-year period. We were the third winningest program in the ACC, but we didn't recruit in those stratospheres. And very few people beat Duke and Carolina for players. That's just the way it is. And especially Duke, during Coach K, and now John's doing a terrific job as well. There are certain people you just don't want to recruit against. We had a kid that I won't mention his name because it's not federal, but whose mom went to Virginia Tech, who was a Virginia kid, and we recruited really, really hard. Duke didn't even recruit the guy. Didn't recruit the guy. He played pretty well in the summer and in the Nike tour, and he blew up. And in 1 week, Duke came in and signed the kid. So and he was a great kid. Loved his family. Loved recruiting the kid. His name's Josh Harrison. He's a beautiful kid. But I
Yeah.
still remember my wife saying, you can go see him 8,000 times. You can develop a great relationship with him. If Duke comes in, you're not going to get him. And that's just the way it was.
Yeah, yeah. I think, one of the things that's been pretty good about the transfer portal is I think we've seen over the last few years that experienced transfers can compete with five-star freshmen, which is bringing a lot more parity, not only to the ACC conference, but the game overall. Did you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I've been saying that for years. Get old and stay old. It's a Mike Brave, philosophy. And if you look at the Final Fours in the last 5, 6, 7 years, they're all teams that are experienced teams. Look at the Kentucky team this year. They got 5 of the top 6 scorers are fifth-year seniors. Tough, grizzled, winning players that are fiercely competitive and buy in. So see what Jay Wright did, obviously by retaining players, having older teams, and he also had pros, but beating the best teams in the country and winning 2 national championships and going to multiple Final Fours. So, yeah, I think you have to. How do you learn to make good decisions? You make some bad ones. And a high school kid watches college basketball. I don't care how good he is, and it looks easy on TV. And in reality, it's not. People are game planning. People are deciding what to give and what to take away. You have pressure of school. You have pressure of now, especially these young talented players have parental pressure because parents are trying to monetize their kids to an extent. Pressures from agents, peer pressure, social media pressure, expectation that's unrealistic pressure. So it's hard. It's hard. It's a lot harder than it looks on TV. There are great freshman players, and great freshman players this year, but to win championships, you probably need an experienced roster.
Yeah, I think when Kentucky lost in the opening round to Oakland last year, I think pretty much at the end of that game, Coach Calipari admitted that I can't do this with one and done freshmen, right? I've got to have some more experienced players in here. I think he pretty much admitted it after that game.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, Cal's been able to win, be able to win with one and done guys. He's won national championships, but he also had smattering of experienced players in there, and that that game was an example of Look, they had an amazing. The craziest thing about Calipari last year, they had an amazing season. We did game day at Alabama. They ran Alabama right off the court. Alabama ended up in the Final Four. But when you get into the NCAA tournament, and, you get play against a hot hand, and their defense was not good all season long. Uh, you know, they got beat by a hot hand and a lack of toughness, and probably the suffocating. They lost to St. Peter's also. It becomes suffocating, the expectation, and then the other team's trying to win also. The other team's got players,
Yeah.
but yeah, I would think that Cal's roster at Arkansas is a mix of both. Unfortunately, he only has 9 guys, and he's got a bunch of injuries. But you've got to have experienced players to win at the highest level, no doubt.
Yeah, no question, no question. Um, Seth, I'm not sure to what extent the average college basketball fan is aware that many of the college programs now have GMs or general managers. Can you discuss the prevalence of GMs currently in college basketball today and the specific roles that they play in the programs?
Yeah, basically roster management. I think the roster management is so important, and also part of roster management is being forward thinking and being aware of who's going to come into the portal, and having the relationships with the agents and the grassroots people to find out early who's going to go into the portal. But roster construction is so important. You saw what John Shire did this past year. You got 3 and 4 transfers to go along with that great recruiting class. The Mason Gillises, the Malik Browns, the Sion Jameses, right? Tough, experienced players. You look what happened at Kentucky. He went and got their Ortega Owe, who's a tough physical defender, and his whole roster. When coaching jobs change, you've seen all those teams basically rebuild their whole roster. So GMs are in charge of basically your salary cap, which is the amount of money you have in your collective, and how you're going to disperse it along with your head coach. It's in charge of uh, evaluating potential roster people for the portal, and developing those relationships. It's managing your current players with their collective responsibilities, if they do have NAL responsibilities, managing all the other people that surround that player, because the circle of a player is so much greater. So I think the general manager is taking some of the pressure off the head coach of dealing with those problems on a day-to-day basis. Your staff's job, besides recruiting and player development and coaching and scouting organization, your staff's job is to take certain things off of your plate to make sure that the head coach is focusing on the very most important things. So the general manager is part Dobo, part uh, chief of staff, part capologist, and part forward-thinking evaluator.
Yeah, I mean, over the years in professional sports, we've seen some power struggles between coaches, managers, and GMs. At this point, we assume, I mean, that the head coach still has the final say on what
No,
players are
no, no.
coming to the program.
GMs, yeah, GMs work for the head. The GMs work for there's not going to be where, the athletic director is not hiring the GM. The
Yeah,
head coach is hiring the GM, and then the GM
yeah.
is answering, is basically in constant communication with the
Yeah,
head coach.
and you were kind of what you were saying before. What I think is pretty cool for some of the bigger programs is it seems like they'll bring in these stud freshmen, but I think they're getting these other players in who are willing to say, "Hey, I'm willing to go to a Kentucky or Duke, possibly win a national championship, and I'm going to play a role." Right, which I think
Yeah,
is really key here. I mean, I think you're seeing more players accepting of that, like, "Hey, I'll go play for that program, and I don't mind being a role player," which I think is a pretty nice fit for these guys.
you have to have role players, and role players are guys that play to their strengths and fit a void, and that's really what it is. And everyone can't be the leading scorer. And I think that Kentucky did a really good job with their roster construction. I think Duke has done a really good job with their roster construction. You look around the country, and you know, it's a puzzle, and the pieces have to fit, and everyone can't be the biggest piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Certain guys, but if you got to understand who you are and how you win individually and collectively. And those role players are guys that understand who they are and how they win. And some people say, well, it's not who you are, it's just what you need for the team to win. Now, most times you find role players where I disagree. is most times you find role players that this is what they do really well. So show people what you can do and not what you can't do. And they buy into what they do well. And then those guys enhance the good of the group, which enables your team to be the best version of itself.
Yeah, no, that's a great fit for these teams. Seth, thanks to NIL, collectives, and the transfer portal, the job of a college coach has changed significantly over the last few years. These changes most likely played roles in the retirements of Coach K, Jay Wright, Nick Saban, and most recently, the shocking retirement of Tony Bennett, only a couple of weeks before the start of the season. Do you think college coaching has become more difficult, or is it just a lot different from what it used to be and requires a fair amount of adaptation?
Well, in any business, agility is one of the most important traits you can have. And, I talk to a lot of my friends that are still coaching, some guys that have gotten out of coaching, and you got to decide what you're comfortable doing. Everyone has to make a personal choice. If you're going to do it, then you got to be all in and you've got to be forward thinking and you've got to, use the rules to your advantage. Uh, if you're uncomfortable with that, like Tony Bennett said, like he was uncomfortable feeling that he could adapt at this moment in this moment in time. Things can change, but in this moment in time, he felt like he was not the best person to lead Virginia because maybe of his unwillingness to adapt to the new world of college athletics. So, to me, you got to look in the mirror and say, what am I comfortable doing? Is this why I got into it? So some of the guys that left, that's not why they got into it because people always say, oh, the coaches make all that money. None of us got into coaching to make a lot of money because when we all got into coaching, there was no money. My first job at Columbia was 12.5. All right, 12.5. My first job at Pitt was $20,000. All right, so when people say, "Oh, the coaches make all this money," well, people don't have a problem with the coach. Well, most of the coaches didn't make money, and assistant coaches are getting paid a lot more money. So it is. There's more money in the profession, and there are going to be more things asked of you, and you have to have agility. And the agility part of it, you just got to decide what am I comfortable doing, and then live within your comfort zone. So yeah, is it harder? I'll tell you what, it's not as rewarding. I think if you'd ask the coaches, because a big part of coaching was is relationships. You build a bridge for others to cross. You build a bridge and develop relationships that are not for 4 years, but for the rest of your life. When I recruited, we always say, this is not a 4-year relationship. All right. This is something that, for the rest of your life. Now, our relationship will change from recruitment to coaching to graduation to watching, your former players become husbands and fathers and successful people that impact, their communities. Those things change. Well, with the transfer portal, where everything is transactional, if you can't retain players, you lose those relationships. When you lose those relationships, a lot of the satisfaction you get from coaching is lost. See, everyone thinks everyone gets caught up in wins and losses. And look, yeah, you love the great wins, and and the losses, tear your heart out. But in the end, the most enjoyable thing is seeing people grow and develop and have successful lives. And I had a situation this April after the Final Four. My wife and I, we went to California. Well, Long Beach State was my first head coaching job. It was around the time of my birthday. Unbeknownst to me, my wife and one of my former managers put together this surprise birthday party for me, where I had about 20 or 30 of my former players. That was an amazing night.
Yeah.
And that's why you coach. I'm not saying you don't coach, because it's your job, but it's also got to be your passion. And the relationships that you develop are real. They're real. Those players become part of your family. You become part of their family. And those are the things why you coach. So yeah, you just got in the end, you got to be comfortable with what you're doing. If you're not comfortable with what you're doing, like Coach Saban said, when he had players that were more concerned about, their NIL or their pay for play money as opposed to what their role and how they can impact winning. You've got to find a balance between that. You can do it. You can do it. I mean, you see what's happening, and some coaches are afraid to coach their teams because they're afraid to coach teams because if you coach them too hard, they're going to go in the portal. And I tell those guys, and I'm really honest about you, hey, if you don't coach your players, you're cheating them. You're not helping them basically get where they want to go. You can't enable. You've got to set a standard, hold them to a standard, and try to help them get better in every aspect of their life. And the guys that are afraid to coach their teams, you can see it. They're going to win the games they need to, are supposed to win, but they're not going to win the games they need to win. So, for my message to all young coaches is recruit with integrity, coach your team, be demanding, hold them to a standard. The standard is the standard, and don't cheat them. And you know what? If they don't want to buy in, then you know what? Then you're right. They need to go. But if you're afraid to coach your team, you're not helping that young person. If you're not afraid to mentor your players, you're not helping that person.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody thinks about that, right? I mean, for coaches that, have a history of, really getting in players' faces. And I do think the game's changed a little bit where, kids have become increasingly sensitive to that even before the transfer portal. But it's certainly something that's on people's minds, to say, hey, can this coach really be yelling at these kids where he may turn around and not show up the next day and say, that's it, I'm in the portal, I'm getting ready for the next year. But I think it's a good point. I mean, you got to coach the way you coach, right? If you're going to succeed.
Just coach within your personality. And if that recruit knows you coach your team players hard, you know what? He's making a choice. I want to be coached. Dan Hurley is having a monster recruiting class right now. He coaches his team. I go over there about once every couple of weeks. Those guys know you come to UConn, you're going to get coached every day, and you're going to be demanded, and you're going to understand what sacrifice is, and playing hard, and playing for each other, and doing all the small things, and doing the tough things consistently. Because in life, you're going to have to do the tough things consistently. So if you're a member of a team, you got to learn to do the tough things consistently. I mean, that's just the way it is. And I'm not talking about screaming and berating. And no, I'm not talking about that. But being demanding, yeah, without a doubt. Setting the standard, without a doubt. Being called out if you're not basically doing the things that need to be done to help the team be successful. If you're coming to practice and just putting in time and not getting better, well, the day you condone that behavior is the day that you lose your team, plain and simple.
Yeah, yeah. You guys did a great job. I don't know if Game Day made a trip up last year to Connecticut, and you kind of gave a really good behind the scenes look at Coach Hurley and his program there. And, I think the message was, if I remember that, they almost wanted to make practice more intense than the game. So then when the game time came, they're like, yeah, this is easy. I mean, this is easier than practice, which pretty amazing, right? I mean, you remember, 4 o'clock practice in the afternoons, kids have gone to class, they've been up early. I mean, pretty hard every day to walk into that gym with real intensity. But, without a doubt, it seems like they can do it at UConn.
Why wouldn't you come in? You love the game. You get lost in the game. You get lost in the process. You get lost in your teammates. I mean, to me, if you want to be good at something, you show up every day. You can't pick and choose the days you're going to be responsible and accountable. And I think that's what Dan has done. I mean, he's like, no. So you're going to pick we're playing that, low Division I team or mid-major team at home. He's right. No, you show up every day. It's like leadership. So if you lead a company, all right, if you're a CEO, are you going to pick and choose when you're going to be accountable and responsible and be ready to go? Because if you have that mindset, then the people that you're supposed to inspire, all of a sudden, if you're not excited about being there every day, now that's the thing about Dan. I've never seen him have a bad practice. I've never seen a guy have a bad practice. And that's what a head coach, Kelvin Sampson has a great line. He says, the head coach can never have bad practice. Because basically, if a head coach has a bad practice, that's basically telling everyone in the organization, all right, that, you know what, I didn't show up today. I wasn't ready to go. So why should I hold you accountable for being ready to go every day? It's a real world issue. The real world issue is if you want to be successful, if you want to be good, if you want to be elite at something, all right, you got to stack days. And the only way you stack days and put good days on top of each other is when the light bulb goes on, you're ready to go. When you walk into that practice, you're ready to go. When you walk into your office to work, you're ready to go. You're organized and you put in the work to have a chance to be successful. Because without those things, you have no chance to be really successful.
Right. In the case of Tony Bennett, obviously he came out and said he was entirely not comfortable in the NIL transfer portal, the agents being involved with the players, was had some concerns about the mental health of the players with all these changes. You would have to think, though, I mean, incredibly successful coach. I've never met Tony. Obviously, seems like a great guy, class to the business. But amazing that since they won the national championship in 2019, they had not won a tournament game. They kind of had a disaster last year in the tournament against Colorado State. They scored 14 points in the first half. And I think Tony had come out before he retired and made some commentary that, hey, we're going to have to open up the offense a little bit. But I mean, that was his style of play, and I'm not sure that players really were ready to buy into that going forward. I mean, to be honest with you, I love watching college basketball games. I didn't love watching UVA games, the last few years. It was not the funnest brand of basketball. I mean, I've got to think to a certain extent that had to have played in to say, hey, this is my style of coaching. I've had incredible success, but I'm just not sure it works today like it used to. What do you think about that?
Well, they put a lot of guys in the NBA, and those guys they put in the NBA have done really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. He teaches you how to play. Look again when you recruit players that fit your system. Those players know exactly how they were going to play. But the proof's in. Do they develop players? Yes. Have they won games? Yes. Have they won championships? Yes. Have they lost some tough games early? Yes. Their recruiting has dropped off. That there's no doubt about that. Is the recruiting dropped off because they don't have enough money in NIL? Is the recruiting dropped off because of style of play? Who knows? I just know that Tony Bennett is a heck of a coach. He could coach any style of basketball. I think he'd be a good NBA coach. He's got
Yeah.
the demeanor to coach in the NBA. He's forward thinking. He's creative. Uh, there was a rumor they were going to play more 5 out this year. I haven't actually. This afternoon. I'm going to watch some tape on Virginia because they played Villanova tonight, and I'm in the studio for that. But uh, I think it was more of again. I'd never want to speak for Tony because I mean he has his own reasons. But I think it was a little bit of a personal choice. You can only do what you're comfortable doing. He has his pillars. If he didn't think his pillars fit with the culture of college basketball today, maybe that was the deal. Maybe now, if we end up with a legitimate salary cap per se, they're talking about, maybe, and there's a more level playing field, maybe things will change. But yeah, I mean, look, that style's not for everyone. But I'll tell you what it learns. It teaches you how to pass, cut, screen, read screens, good shot, bad shot, brace a roll, play hard, be a good teammate. Like, those are pretty good traits to have. I
Yeah.
don't care the style of play. And then you go back and you look at the players, whether it's Hunter or Ty Jerome or Joe Harris, or you go and like the number of guys they have in the NBA, you know, kind of pretty good. To be honest
Impressive.
with you.
Definitely impressive. Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me a little bit of my older brother went to William and Mary, and this was probably late 70s. William and Mary actually had a pretty good program at that
Yeah.
time, but obviously there was no shot clock back there. And I remember he got down there, and the rule was 10 passes before any shot went up. And I think the kid out of New York was kind of like, whoa, I'm not used to that. But, it's funny how some of the things that used to happen pre-shot clock back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, look, the game has changed, the profession has changed, but I think if you're a good player, you want to be coached, and
Yeah.
that's just the
You
way
know,
it is.
I get you. Hey, by the way, you were an assistant to Coach Terry Holland in 1984 when that team made it to the Final Four. That was a great team, actually, the first year after Ralph Sampson. Do you remember who you guys beat in the first round of the tournament that year?
Iona,
There you go. I was on the Gales there. It was like a
yeah, and
great
what's it
game, right?
called?
1 point game in the
Well,
Meadowlands.
oh, yeah, well, it was the little guard from New York. Who was the
Rory
little dude?
Grimes.
Rory Grimes. He could get
Yeah.
to the rim in a heartbeat. Yeah, we got through that game by 1 point. I think we beat Arkansas in the second round. Every one of those games we won by a point or two. Terry Holland is probably the greatest person I've ever been around in coaching. It's
Yeah.
not he became my mentor. He saved my career when I left Pitt, or was asked to leave Pitt because I didn't want to do what someone asked me to do. Uh, uh, Dave Odom helped me become quote unquote graduate assistant, whatever. at Virginia, and it was the greatest experience of my life. Changed my career, changed some of what my outlooks on things. Terry Holland was probably the most influential person in my adult life. A great mentor, a great man. I always tell people there wasn't a major decision I ever made after 83, 84 that I didn't consult him and ask his opinion, including asking my wife to marry me, which is pretty incredible. And we're
Nice.
still married 38 years later.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, very successful, great coach. Uh, one more before we leave this topic. One, obviously a lot of negativity around the changes, and people are getting used to things. But I think one of the positives of all the changes is kids are getting played now, so you'll get some great players who'll stay in the game longer, right? Who maybe don't have great NBA prospects, but they're great players. I mean, I think of three Carolina players, who were teammates at one time: Armando Bacot, R.J. Davis, still one of the best players, and Caleb Love, who stayed and playing in Arizona. So, it is good that you are getting some players who say, "Hey, I'll make more money staying here through NIL than I will if I can't make it in the NBA and have to go play in Europe."
Yeah, there's no, it's part of player retention. Yeah, I mean, Hunter Dickinson's a perfect example. But and you also, and we talk about the salary cap type thing. And I thought Coach Saban put it well. I said, now the thing is you got to make sure you're paying the right guys.
Yeah,
Retaining the right guys. Like
right, right.
I'm not going to embarrass the guy's name, but there's a guy that's got paid $2 million that yesterday I think he had two more points than I scored. So I mean, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, the whole idea is you're right. Like the NBA is the most exclusive club in the world.
Yeah,
And all these kids think it's a rite of passage. I'm a McDonald's All American. I'm going to be pro. No, you're not. All right, like there are guys that were McDonald's All Americans that were pros because they continue to work, they continue to get better. The game caught up to them, or they caught up to the game where other guys maybe lost some of it. So, yeah, I mean, like great thing about the portal is one that I mean, excuse me, the pay for play is that you do keep the better players uh, in school because they're not pros and their value, as opposed to playing in G League or going overseas, where people think, "Oh, I'll just go overseas." The money in overseas is only overseas basketball is about productivity, not potential. The NBA is about potential. So young guy with potential is going to get drafted before a guy that is a very good college player, but his game does not translate. So, yeah, we've had a lot of players that have stuck around, and that's why we have older rosters. Between that and the COVID year, you see guys that are in their fourth school, so they're basically part of nothing. You talk about mental health, I'll give you mental health. A kid thinks he's an NBA player. All right, he's getting paid in college a significant amount of money, blows that money. All right, isn't an NBA player, has to go overseas, is making $60,000 a year, can't understand when those checks come how small they are. All right, gets cut in Europe because he's not good enough, can't help winning, comes back to the States. He's been to four different schools. Where is he part of? Where does he get his support from?
yeah,
That's a problem.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
real world problem. You talk about mental health. The mental health is that we're creating the scenarios where we think all these kids are pros. We need financial literacy, and we need to for all these players financial literacy, and we also need to have these players understand the reality of what their value is maybe in college compared to what their value is and how hard it is to get to the league. And if they're not in the league, going from charter planes and Ruth Chris and Capitol Grill to commercial traffic and $50 a day per diem, or going overseas and having to be on your own with a different language, making $60,000 as opposed to $400,000. All right, and then getting cut because you're not good enough. To me, that's a real problem. And then for these kids that have been to 3 and 4 schools, when they get older, and I always talk about bridges to cross, they get older, they get married, they have a family. Where do they go back to? Like they want to bring their kids back to their school. Where do they go back to? What are they part of? Where's their support system? Those are real world issues that we have not addressed.
yeah, yeah. I get you. I get you. Seth, a few weeks back, I saw an interview where you proposed that players sign 2-year contracts with buyout options, and the contracts also contain possible academic financial incentives for the players. Can you explain the reasoning for your suggestions? And do you know if there are any serious discussions taking place within the NCAA about possible transfer portal changes, player contracts, or is all current attention focused on finalizing the antitrust litigation?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the NCAA. I just think common sense. We need to, and again, this is goes back to my philosophy of we've taken education out of college athletics. When kids go and visit schools and are being recruited, education is the last thing people talk about. What's your major? Let me meet the dean of that school. Let me meet the president. What's your academic support? Those conversations aren't happening anymore. And in the end, you're on a college campus. That's part of your education. Or, hell, shoot, some kids don't even have any classes on campus. They do everything online. So I mean, but to me, we have to find a way to bring education back into the equation. So to me, I would have academic progress, graduation, community service for sure,
Hmm.
and basically clauses in these contracts that you give these student athletes, because in the end, like you know, basketball is going to be taken away from them, football is going to be taken away from them. How are they going to survive in the real world? And put that into deferred money, so that at the end of their college career, they would have this pot of money if they did what they needed to do, all right, to start their adult life. So that's number one. 2-year contracts, because they got to work through some tough times, and that's just the way it is. And they've got to be part of something, and that's to build the relationship side of it, to be feeling invested in it, not saying, "Well, I didn't get what I wanted, I'm running." We've got to have some type of continuity in college athletics. It's better for the young people. It's better for the enterprise. It's better for everything. So I think that the idea of having contracts where it's 2 or 3 year contracts, and there'll be clauses also for behavior, like or lack of behavior. There'll be clauses for lack of academic performance. There'll be clause, I mean, I think you build in, if we're going to do this thing, build in incentives and accountability, because in the real world, at the end of this journey in college, you know, there's accountability. Like there's no, there's accountability. You got to show up every day. You got to be productive. You got to be on time. You've got to be responsible. You've got to be able to communicate. You can't break the law. You can't do things that, you know, would be a bad reflection on the organization that you're working for. So to me, we've got to teach some life skills. We've got to go back to teaching some lessons that actually have these young people understand. You're 21 years old, but you got 60 years ahead of you. All right. How are you going to conduct yourself? And the world those next 60 years might be very different than the world in the 2 or 3 years you're in college. And I just think we're headed for potentially some really sad stories.
Yeah, I mean, that'll take me right into my next question. With everything going on, it certainly seems that academics are moving further in the background these days. On ESPN's College Game Day a few weeks back, Coach Saban cited a statistic which showed that for every time a player transferred, his odds of obtaining a diploma declined by 20%.
Yep.
Back in your day, I'm sure you had a great record. It used to be considered bragging rights for some coaches who would see most of their players graduate. I mean, that's obviously become increasingly difficult with all the transfers. And now we've got new conference realignments, which require some substantial travel, more time away from campus. I think we're still talking about college student athletes, but it just feels more and more as though short-term financial considerations take precedence over education. And I sometimes just wonder, especially in basketball and football, are these still college students, or it's almost sometimes you feel like it has this become professional minor leagues. I mean, and sometimes you feel like it resembles the minor leagues a little bit more. I mean,
The minor
it's
leagues wishes they were treated as well as these guys in college now.
high
Well,
end, high
well,
end without a doubt.
on the upside, look, there's still mid majors and there's still bus trips and there's still, I mean, I'm talking about the Power Five conferences.
Yeah.
Although, like like I talked to a Missouri Valley coach the other day. There's $800,000, $900,000 collectives. So guys, guys are making money. I mean, right over here in Quinnipiac, Tom Picard, who's a terrific coach, great person. He's using his NIL money for attention, but they have some. Everyone's got a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about. We've got to find a way to put education back into at least in the conversation, because and I think the other thing we've got to do is we also got to create, being that boosters are fair game now. It used to be stay away from boosters, stay out. I mean, the things that used to kill you in coaching is boosters, a car, uh, money. Well, that's all part of the collectives and the fake NIL deals. I mean, there are schools that are bragging about, oh, our whole football team gets a Dodge Charger, which is great. But I mean, that used to be like a deal ender, And then the other thing was gambling, and yet every single college basketball game has gambling commercials.
Yeah.
I mean, like it used to be, don't bet on it. You probably had that sign in your locker room. Don't bet on it. Well, yeah, don't bet on it. Yet, like every time you turn on the TV, hey, it's right on your phone. Boom, hey, hey, this king, that king, that. To me, those are scary things. I understand it's part of society, but those are accidents waiting to happen, and just the way it is. I mean, look, you have the same percentage of young people, athletes, that in the rest of the campus community probably will end up making a bad decision and hurting their careers. I mean, look, we all know that way back in the day, every college campus had a bookie. All right. I mean, that's every college. I bet there was some guy who was a bookie on Iona's campus. I guarantee there was a bookie.
Absolutely, sure.
I mean, just it's the way the world we. So maybe it's better that it's wide open. People can track it. I don't know, but I just know that the one thing we should do is every school should have a mentorship program. I'm a really big believer. Everyone should have a mentor. To me, a mentor is someone who helps basically build a bridge and stand beside you, and help you navigate this thing called life without asking for anything in return.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of every athletic department, if I coached again, I would start a mentoring program where I would align players with successful people who could not give them money, but it could actually teach them life lessons that they can apply for the rest of their life to help them navigate this thing called life. And then also be a reference. Maybe pick up the phone and help them get a job. Maybe give them an opportunity after they graduate in an area where they could grow, develop, and mature, and have a career that's outside of athletics. We've got these huge booster organizations, but there's more ways to help someone than to give them something. Like, it's like, teaching someone to fish. What was that great story? If you teach a man to fish, if you buy a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a person to fish, he eats for a lifetime.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm not good.
No, you got it. Yeah,
I'm not really.
absolutely.
I'm not good in that folksy bullshit. I'm more like straight line, no bullshit. This is the way it is. I speak in real world language.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to look at everything right now and say, where are the academics in all this? And certainly, I think somewhat to the NCAA's credit, or in defense, the courts have really dictated a lot, right? I mean, they've forced their hands in. And I will ask you, I mean, it's funny, something that I always heard about, it happened a lot when I played, it's happened a lot over the years, was, players invariably would be declared academically ineligible. Now, I don't even hear that anymore. And I don't know, maybe it's a credit to the programs that they've got all these tutors, they've got the study halls. But I mean, you're having kids now who are pretty much full-time players year round now that they're getting paid. And I don't know if the schools have backed off on this. And I'll tell you what, if I was a good player and I was declared academically ineligible, I'd go get a good lawyer and say, hey, you got to get me restored here. This is going to potentially cost me millions of dollars. I've got a school that's asking me to compete academically as some kid who's got no job or a part-time job. And, So I mean, do you even hear anymore of players being declared academically ineligible?
Yeah, I don't think you hear it, but I mean, so it's as a coach, I mean, like, I've been out 12 years, but it's something you would worry about. You're in finals week. There's no doubt about it. Midterms,
Yeah.
check in, but I think there's more academic support. More classes are online. That's going to be the next scandal, or probably is a scandal as we go along. I mean, online
Sure.
classes take away the whole idea of college. To be honest with you, I mean, online classes were built for remote education was built for people that didn't have the ability or the money to get to a college campus. They weren't built for, but it's not leaving it's not leaving universities, because the amount of money made on remote education is absolutely mind-boggling. I remember when I was at Long Beach State, we had a vice president called Bob Bean. We were one of the first schools that had online education. And that money that was generated from that organization funded a lot of different things on campus. So, yeah, you don't hear a lot. I think academic support is really good if universities take care of it. I think that unfortunately some guys who think they're going to be short timers, there are enough if a guy's going to be on campus 2 years. There's enough classes for a guy to, who just wants to hide to take to stay eligible. We all know
Yeah.
it. I mean, you had those classes at Iona. Come on, like, you kidding me? I mean, like, that's not exactly Harvard, Harvard or New Rochelle. I mean, there's enough people with buy-in, and look, and we also live in a world since COVID and other things where there's great forgiveness. There
Yeah.
is. And
I,
schools want to keep their, not just student athletes, they want to keep everyone eligible and graduate them. I mean, when I was at Columbia, I remember guys used to tell me the hardest thing about Columbia was getting in. Once you got in, it was another academic institution. Great
yeah.
integrity, great education, great network, great alumni base. But the hardest thing about college today, even for any student, hardest thing is getting in. Getting into to college of your choice is hard now
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
regular student.
Yeah.
Staying in, you just got to make sure you control the distractions.
Yeah, really competitive. Let me ask you a question that I did throw out a few weeks ago to your colleague Jay Billis.
My
I want to get your
condolences.
take. Historically, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee has not differentiated between losses suffered early in the season and those losses suffered later in the year. Given that roster turnover is at an all-time high and teams will naturally need some time to gel and find their identity early in the season, it would seem to make sense that the committee would place less emphasis on early season losses. What do you think, Seth?
You are your body of work. It's the same for everyone. I mean, plain and simple. If you're reconstructing your roster or you've had big turnover, you know, you're not the only one who's having to deal with that. It used to be the last 10 games. Now, actually, the NCAA tournament, it is. They look at your total body of work, and I think that makes sense. I think the biggest fraud with selection committee, and obviously it affected me, is people say, well, who'd you play in your non-conference? Well, if you play in the ACC, like when I was coaching the ACC, and for 8 years, and you're playing Duke twice. That was when the schedule was more balanced. You're playing Duke twice, Maryland twice, Carolina twice, Virginia twice. All right, and you play a little bit softer. And people talk about my schedule. Actually, if you really look at my schedule, we schedule teams. They just had good years. Some years we scheduled light non-conference because we were starting 4 freshmen that year. But when you play 18 games in a conference like the ACC, or 20 games now that some conferences are playing, what do you want to go toe to toe 30 times? That's why you play some guarantee games early. You're still playing
Yeah.
in an MTE, you're playing in a made for television event like the ACC SEC Challenge. So I think your body of work is your body of work. But I do think that in the end, we're going to expand the NCAA tournament to 96 teams. I think you have to, when you have super conferences, when you have 18 and 16 and eventually maybe even 20 teams in a conference, getting 6 teams in the NCAA tournament's not flying, man. It's not flying. You get these super conferences, and you got 14 teams that aren't getting in the tournament, even because teams in leagues, you play. So you got 20-game schedule, and you're getting only 6 or 7 teams, and you're the money makers. You're the ones that are driving the television contracts. You're saying, wait a second. So I actually believe we're going to end up going to 96. I think we're going to end up taking, instead of the first 4, it might be the first 16. So there's going to be 4 regions. All right. And the winner out of those 4 regions, basically, which is basically the first 4, the winners out of those regions, then they're going to get into the field. So if you take the 16 leagues, bottom 16 of the conferences in college basketball by the analytics, if you take the bottom 16 team, now you have 8 spots. You're just adding 16 spots to the 68, and now all of a sudden, you can have a bigger field. More teams will be in the tournament, but you're going to also have more of the super conferences represented.
So would that look like a kind of like an enlarged play-in section to get to 64?
Yeah, not a play-in. It's the first 16. We don't call them play-ins. We call they're in the tournament. They're in the tournament. It's just it's the first and second round. It's the opening weekend.
Look, America loves an underdog story, and
we're keeping them alive. We're going to get the best ones in there because those teams are going to play against each other. So the best ones will then advance.
Yeah. I mean, that's I don't know how many of the lower conferences get the automatic bids, and there have been some great stories historically, but typically, those teams do not advance very far, and they are taking up spaces for some really good teams, and obviously the money's getting so big, it's hard to keep those teams out of the tournament. So let's see. So you're saying 96. Let's see what happens.
96 or 92. And I'll tell you the other thing. So for the people that say, well, how can you take a 500 team from the Big Ten? They've lost this many games. Yeah, they have lost. Look who they're playing against.
Yeah.
We're seeing that in the college football playoff things right now. People say, can you take a two-loss team? Well, hell no. Half of the SEC has 2 losses.
Yeah.
It's the best conference in college football. There might be a 3-loss team. Look who they played. So, I mean, they're in a mini version. College football is experiencing this right now.
Well, I liked Jay's answer to my question because, really for the power conference schools, his answer was, who cares? Right? I mean, these teams, they're early in the year, they're non-conference. He said these teams are going into their conferences. They're playing the best teams, on a nightly basis. He said, shouldn't that be what we're basing teams on? And I do think, with the expanded conferences and these power teams, I mean, it's a tough road without a doubt. I mean, you had to play Duke and Carolina twice in smaller conferences, but still, I mean, there are not many nights off these days, and these are expanded leagues. It's not an easy road.
No, the one negative about the league is obviously their unbalanced schedule. So if you get the right schedule, say if the bottom of your league is not good, like right now in college basketball, the Big 12 and the SEC, the depth of those 2 leagues are really good. The ACC, actually, the depth has gotten better because SMU is going to be better than people think. Stanford's going to be better than people think. Now, Virginia, we don't know who they're going to be. I mean, but the bottom of your league has got to come up. But if you play a soft bottom of your league multiple times, because those are your crossover games, you can stack wins, but they're not going to be wins against the field. But if you're playing a good schedule in terms of a competitive schedule within your league, and you're in one of those major conferences, like, hey, if you play in the Big 12, you're going to have losses. If you play in the SEC, Alabama to me is the most explosive team in college basketball. They're going to lose games. The Big 12, it's hard to win. The one thing people haven't realized is, like in the SEC, and maybe the Big 12. Big 12 actually has great fan base. SEC games aren't games anymore; they're events. It used to be, basketball was something that just followed football. The ownership in basketball in the SEC is incredible. The ACC, it's always been that way. Now, some of the teams have kind of struggled a little bit. They lost a little bit of fandom. And that's a concern. Like, BC doesn't have the crazy atmosphere that you would like it to have. But, you get in league play, man, it's hard to win in league. It's hard to win on the road in league. It's just the way it is in all leagues. But, I mean, when you're playing those power conferences, there's just more good teams. That's just the way it is. And so, like, when people look at your non-conference schedule, I think it's a joke because you're getting your brains beaten for, from January to March, every single game isn't a game, it's an event. And so you're going to play a couple softer games to get a feel for your rotation. Just don't lose those games.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Seth, let me take you a little bit back to your coaching days. I think you had 2 wins over Duke and Coach K when you were at Virginia Tech. obviously playing Duke was a game that you and your players would be super pumped for. But what was it like for you?
Actually it's three, but that's okay.
A three. I apologize. We got to get an update on Wikipedia there. We got to get somebody updating that. What was it like for you personally going up against Coach K? I mean, Coach K, arguably the greatest coach of all time. I mean, we know how pumped up the team would be just for the Duke game, but what was it like for you saying, I'm coaching against Coach K tonight? What's that like for you, or was it like?
Coach K wasn't a problem. It was his players that were the problem. You see, I knew Coach K before he was Coach K, when he was Mike.
Yeah.
Mike was and played at Army. For my college coach was a guy named Alabama, who you probably know, and Alabama was an assistant coach of Bob Knight at Army, and Coach K was actually a player at Army when Coach Lowe was there. So every year when I was a player, Coach K would come down and speak at Coach Alabama's coaching clinic. And I was usually the demonstrator. It wasn't worth a shit, but I was a good demonstrator.
Yeah.
So, I knew Mike from way back there. In fact, when I was at Columbia as an assistant, Buddy Mahar and I once drove up to West Point, and we just spent the day talking ball with Mike, philosophy, defense, offense, and things of that nature. So, I knew him in a different way. I mean, look, they set the standard. Duke was the standard of college basketball, when I was coaching at Virginia Tech. And, the line I would say, what Coach K's magic juices, besides obviously having great players, is he was the greatest motivator in the history of basketball, baby. He could create a cause for anything. And that's why, even though Duke was the biggest game on everyone's schedule, they were always ready to play. It was a whiteout, a blue out, a maroon out, or whatever time they played. I mean, that was a chance to do something special. So, the biggest thing, and what I took from Mike, was basically, when you play Duke, and this is what I try to instill on our team, the hardest playing, toughest team finds a way to win. Right? So you've got to be that team every day in practice, and you've got to be that team every single time you put on that jersey and play. So matching the intensity and the toughness and the physicality and the will to win and the competitive spirit, that was the toughest thing to play against when you play against Mike's teams, besides their talent level. So, I mean, I just didn't want to get the shoulder pat at the end of the game, because, when he shook your hand, if he gave you the shoulder pat, that means they kicked your ass. So,
Yeah.
but no, look, I mean, coaching the ACC, whether it was coaching against Roy or coaching against Mike or coaching against Gary Williams, coaching against Tony Bennett, I mean, Jim Larinaga, I mean, it was a challenge. They're great coaches. But, coaching against Mike, I mean, if you were fortunate enough to beat them, and we had some great games. We lost on a half-court shot. We lost on a bullshit traveling call my last year there, which was ridiculous. They're trying to foul us at the end of the game, and I'm not going to mention the official's name, but he calls absolutely a bullshit traveling call on our best free throw shooter, Eric Green. But we had great games against them. We had a philosophy on how to play against them in terms of matching their toughness. It was an honor competing against Duke. It was obviously, he's the all-time winningest coach in men's college basketball. I mean, it was an honor to compete against them. It was a challenge, because his teams were always ready to play and compete. So it wasn't like I was sitting there at night going, "Oh shit, I'm playing against Mike," because I played against Mike in pickup games at 5-star, when I was younger, and he was older. He's older than me, and I'd kick his ass in those games. So I played against Mike would have been a problem. It's playing against the dudes I had to play against. That was a real problem.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier there, motivator, and one of the literally greatest experiences of my life. Good friend, Coach O'Toole, Timmy O'Toole, really hooked up me and your buddy Danny Cannell. We were up in New York about 14 or 15 years ago at a charity event. Duke was playing Gonzaga the next night in the Garden, and we just happened to go down. Timmy wanted to go down and see some of the coaches, and somehow we wound up by happenstance in his team meeting that night in the ballroom where he saw us. He said, "Guys, come in, introduce the team, and sit down." And it was so incredibly motivating. And this wasn't 10 minutes before the game. I mean, this was the night before the game, and he was just getting these kids so focused, so fired up. And Danny Cannell, who played for legendary coach Bobby Bowden, I remember walking out and, Danny literally said, I feel like I could run through a wall right now, just after hearing that speak. So I don't, people on the outside, I don't think they realize sometimes just the talent that it takes to be able to motivate kids, and some of these guys I think are just at such an elite level. And people just don't really see that. And it was a real eye opener to me, to be honest with you.
No, look, I say he's what he did with the Olympic team, incredible. The ownership they had, the pride that he got those guys to have, that created what our Olympic program is now. And the other thing about Mike, that's really really special is that when I got let go, first phone call I got was from Mike Krzyzewski.
Oh, awesome.
Which was huge. My wife had some medical issues. We wanted to get her the best medical care. I picked up the phone. I called his office, spoke to Mike, and the next day she was seeing a specialist at Duke.
Wow.
So I mean, like what Mike has done is, and you think about what he did with Jimmy Valvano, being by his side, fierce competitors, but kind of grew up together in the profession. Very, very different people, but standing with him, beside him, the emotion of that speech and being there that day, and one of his fiercest competitors, yet was one of his dearest friends. So, I mean, like I joke about Mike, but I have so much respect for him because he's done things that he didn't have to do, that no one talks about, but that he's done because of the essence of the person he is.
Yeah, no, it's just amazing. And I don't want to keep you too long. I'll get you moving, but I will say quickly, your coach Al Labalbo. I mean, one of the all-time great personalities. Right? I mean, he
My
was.
guy was the best.
Oh
He
my
was
God,
the
he was a character. He came into Jack Hearn's camp every year and did the
oh my God.
lunchtime. And boy, I was sitting there next to O'Toole one day, and he called us up. He was giving it to us big time. He was a really, really funny guy.
Yeah, my first practice at Fairleigh Dickinson. He coached UB Brown. UB Brown's dad was his manager at high school, tremendous high school coach in New Jersey. So my first college practice, but he taught school, and he would come over to Fairleigh to run practice. And my first college practice, walk into the great arena at Rutherford, all 1,200 seats of it, and there were 14 chairs across the free throw line. And we walked in the gym, and assistant coach Coach Wiseman said, "Take a seat." So now we got these new practice gear, white shorts, they'll anyway. And it's first real practice. I mean, you're first college practice. And all of a sudden, 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by. All of a sudden, here comes Coach Lowe down the stairs off the stage, and he walks in. He's got this big old glasses that he had, and he had the skinniest legs in the world. He had these maroon pants, and when he walked, his pants legs would wave. It was like he had no legs. All right. And he's chewing on a cigar, and he's walking in front of us. And he goes, "Hey, I'm your coach, Alabama." Like, no shit. I mean, it's why, we're all here. You're our coach. He goes, I want you to like me, not to love me, because loving leads to blanking, and no one blanks Alabama. And I almost shit my pants.
That's awesome.
And he was a trip. But another guy, that great coach, worked his ass off, considering he taught all day. And we had Noki Johnson, who died tragically in a car accident on the way back from a game. Actually, it was the Iona game. We went back to Rutherford. Then we would drive from Iona back to campus, and it was a bad weather, icy patch, into a tree. Noki was a terrific player. And watching coach in that situation, it just ripped. You could see it ripped the heart out of him. But he always said to me, because he knew I wanted to coach. That's why I went to Fairleigh, because he was such a great coach. And he used to always tell me that you might not like it, but when you have your own team, all right, all these things that we're doing and the foundation that we lay every single day, so you're going to be doing the same thing with your teams. And sure enough, there were certain foundation pieces that, as a head coach for 22 years, that I learned at Fairleigh Dickinson that I would do with my team, especially on the defensive end, every single day. And he was funny because when I became a head coach, he was still living, and he'd call every once in a while, and it was the same thing. He'd go, "Hey," and it'd be dead ass silence. And and I knew, I in my mind, I wanted to say, "Coach, you called me?" Like, "What's up?" And he'd wait about like 20 seconds. He goes, "Hey,
That's awesome.
you really guarded him. I told you you would do those." He's like, "I told you that shit we were teaching you was going to work."
Yeah, yeah,
But it was great. I mean, he was a great coach
yeah.
and,
Just amazing.
teacher. He was an
Yeah.
unbelievable teacher.
Right, right. Let me get you. I'm going to end with one final question on another local coach. It's pretty funny last year. After 68-62 loss to Seton Hall in mid-February last season, Coach Pitino sounded off big time on his St. John's players, citing them for being weak and explaining that it was his first year program had been the most unenjoyable experience of his coaching career. He went on and offered more individual critiques of his players during his post-game press conference. The sports world was pretty shocked, I'd have to say. At that point, the team was 14-12. Coach Pitino came out in the ensuing days and offered apologies all around. But the team went on an amazing streak to finish the season in 2013. Probably, arguably, should have made the NCAA tournament. They didn't. What do you think, Seth? A little bit of a coaching meltdown or pure coaching genius on the part of Rick Pitino?
Well, to be honest with you, it was Rick being Rick. I don't think it's coaching genius. Actually, I got more phone calls from AAU coaches and people in the coaching community. In fact, I had to address it on game day. They were pissed. The AAU coaches of those players that he recruited, saying that they couldn't throw a bounce pass. Well, they can throw a bounce pass, coach. Like, get them to throw a bounce pass. You're arguably one of the top one or two best coaches in the history of college basketball. And it was, yeah, I'm sure it was partially motivation. I just don't, I think in your locker room, I'm all for it. On a public forum, and Rick's probably ticked off at me, and I've known him since I'm 13 years old. Uh, I mean, I have a job and a responsibility. I don't think it's not your place to literally berate. You recruited those guys, you're coaching them, you've had them for 20 games. If they're not playing the way you want them to play and not doing the fundamental things you want them to do, you got to look in the mirror and say that's part of your responsibility. Did they flip it around after that? Yeah, they did flip it around, but look at their schedule when they flipped it around. They had the great Creighton win. Most of those wins were games they had a chance to win. Rick Pitino is one of the greatest coaches in the history of our game at any level. Not even close. He's a brilliant coach, and he's brilliant in everything he does. He doesn't say anything with happenstance, but in that moment in time, yeah, it worked. I just know that I'd been out of coaching for 11 years, and my phone was ringing off the hook with high school coaches and grassroots coaches that were disappointed and upset. But you can get away with that if you're Rick Pitino. I would not suggest any young coach that doesn't have national championships and multiple Final Fours to try that. He can do that. I've got so much respect for Rick Pitino. I mean, like, legitimately. I mean, we all grew up in five-star. He was the first one of us that became a college coach. He was the first one of us to become a college head coach. He's the one that basically helped. I always use the word building bridges. All of us that followed to get into college coaching, going from working to camp, teaching Station 13, teaching stations, coaching, absorbing the lessons learned from the people that the high school and the UB Browns and the Chuck Dailies and the people that are five-star. I just totally disagreed with that in terms of how personal it was. I think
Yeah.
you can be that way in a locker room. I don't think you can be that way without taking some accountability yourself in a public forum, especially today.
Yeah, I mean that was you heard a lot of that in the press last year. A lot of the AAU and the high school people were like, "Hey, this is not going to sit well." But everybody got past it. Rick's
They're
got
good this year, man. They are really good.
22 at number 22. We all remember anybody from the New York area loved the days of Louis and the teams with Chris Mullin and Wennington and
Yeah.
Mark Jackson, everybody. And Rick reestablishes that program, which I'm sure he will. I mean, heck, he did a heck of a job at Iona. Goes in there, does an amazing
Oh,
job, and it
amazing.
looks like the guy's a winner without a doubt.
I was surprised that they played Wagner the other day. They had a really bad crowd, and that's, again, I mean, it's hard. It's hard, but look, he's a great coach. He's a great coach, and I admire. I said what I said because I have a responsibility. That's my job when I'm
Yeah.
asked an opinion. But I have so much respect and admire Rick. I just, hey, he can get away with it. I just think the messaging for a young coach, when things go south, you got to look in the mirror too, because you're part of this. You're part of it. You're going to
Yeah.
celebrate the win. If you're going to get credit for turning them around, and you got to take, the accountability for when they're not playing well.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. Seth, you are so busy right now. We're going to let you roll. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know you've done a ton of work in the fight against cancer with the V Foundation. I hope it's a great season for you. I know you're having some back issues that's holding that golf game up. Heal that back up and come on down here and play some golf with me and Danny when you get a chance.
You guys are swingers. I mean, Cannell. I mean, and problem with Cannell is if he's playing poorly, he'll go into pro shop, change his whole bag, his shoes, and his shirt to change his mojo. I mean, the guy, he's got it, but he's the best. Literally one of the greatest people and families that since I've been out of coaching, that I've had a chance to be around. They are first class, the best.
Danny's the best. His dad is a legend down here in South Florida,
Yep.
longtime doctor for the Marlins, the Dolphins. Danny, any one of us would be privileged to go into Danny's garage because there is no shortage of golf equipment in there, boy.
I've seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah, he's pretty good. Seth, thank you
Chris,
so much.
my
All the
pleasure.
best to you and your family.
Thanks, Ben. Stay well.
Yeah, take care.